Caribbean Sea. 63 nautical miles northwest of the Venezuelan coastline. 1:22 in the afternoon. The USS Harry S. Truman was holding a northbound transit track in international waters. Her nuclear reactors turning the screws at 14 knots. Her flight deck cycling through routine maintenance checks on the electromagnetic launch system. 92 aircraft aboard, a crew of 5,200. The newest air wing the Navy had deployed to the Caribbean in a decade. Then 10 radar contacts climbed out of Venezuelan airspace simultaneously. 7 Sukhoi Su 30 Mk, 2 flankers from Base Aérea El Libertador, 3 F-16A Fighting Falcons from a secondary field 80 miles south. All climbing, all on attack headings, all running their fire control radars actively, broadcasting their positions to every sensor in the theater as clearly as if they had filed a flight plan. Venezuelan command had been building toward this for 4 weeks. American counter-narcotics operations in the Caribbean had been running at an intensity that Caracas hadn't experienced in years. 26 interdicted shipments, 22 tons of cocaine seized, 24 trafficking vessels impounded, all in a single operational period. The shadow economy that kept Venezuela's military leadership cooperative with the government protecting it was bleeding money at a rate that someone at a senior level had decided required a response more dramatic than another round of diplomatic protests. 10 fighters against 1 carrier. The calculus from Caracas ran like this. The Su-30S carried Kot-31A supersonic anti-ship missiles, Mach 2.5, sea-skimming terminal phase, 145-kilogram warheads. Even a single hit on an American carrier created an international crisis of the first order. A near miss created headlines. The mission didn't require sinking the Truman. It required making the world watch Venezuela force America's newest carrier to take evasive action in its own operational theater. Venezuelan command made 5 assumptions that were wrong before the aircraft left the ground. First, they believed the Truman was operating without comprehensive early warning coverage. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye, orbiting at 24,000 feet, 180 miles northeast of the carrier, had the Venezuelan formation on its AN/APY-9 radar the moment the aircraft crossed into international airspace. The APY-9 is an active electronically scanned array that doesn't rotate. It steers its beam electronically and builds a continuous gap-free picture of everything moving within 350 nautical miles. The Venezuelan jets were tracked before their pilots had finished their post-departure checklists. Second, they assumed encrypted radio traffic was secure from American signals intelligence. It wasn't. Third, they believed the strike group's combat air patrol could be overwhelmed by 10 simultaneous contacts before it could be reinforced. They didn't know that 16 FA-18E Super Hornets were already fueled, armed, and sitting in Ready 5 status with pilots strapped in. Fourth, they assumed the Su-30's N001VE radars would achieve fire control lock on the Truman before the American response could develop. The Su-30's radar is a capable system, but it was broadcasting its location to every passive sensor in the strike group from the moment it went active, and the fire control solutions being built against it were complete before any Venezuelan pilot had reached his launch point. Fifth, they assumed the Truman would respond the way a ship responds to an incoming threat, reactively from a fixed position, with the defensive disadvantage of a stationary target. What they were actually triggering was a battle network that extended 300 miles in every direction and had been processing their approach for 47 minutes. At 12:34 p.m., the E-2D's combat information officer transmitted on link 16. 10 hostile air contacts bearing 193 range 148 nautical miles, Venezuelan military fighters all heading toward the strike group. The data populated automatically across every display in every ship in the formation, not as a voice report that required transcription, as live tracks with velocity vectors and threat classifications, feeding directly into fire control solutions that Aegis had already begun computing. Aboard the Truman, Captain Lisa Okafor was in the Combat Direction Center when the tracks appeared. She studied the picture for 4 seconds. General quarters, all hands. Launch the alert package. Get the deck moving. 48 seconds after the alarm sounded, the first electromagnetic launch catapult fired. An FA-18E Super Hornet accelerated from 0 to 165 miles per hour in 2.3 seconds and climbed into Caribbean sky. Then the second catapult. The third. The fourth. All 4 EMALS positions cycling at maximum rate, launching aircraft faster than any steam catapult system the Navy had previously operated. 16 Super Hornets were airborne in 6 minutes and 50 seconds. Each aircraft carried 6 AIM-120D AMRAAMs. The AIM-120D is 12 feet long, 335 pounds, with a 44-pound continuous rod warhead and a guidance system that transitions from mid-course inertial navigation, updated by data link from the launching aircraft, to active radar homing in the terminal phase. Effective engagement range. Published figures say 75 to 100 nautical miles. Classified performance envelopes are larger. The Venezuelan Su-30S would need to close to 50 to 70 kilometers to reach their own K-31A launch parameters. The geometry wasn't in their favor by a margin that the fire control computers had already quantified precisely. The 16 Super Hornets formed up in 2 divisions at 28,000 and 22,000 feet and headed south. The E-2D fed continuous updates through Link 16. Target positions refreshed every 2.4 seconds. Range to the Venezuelan formation, 112 nautical miles. Closure rate, 9 nautical miles per minute. Here's what's worth understanding about beyond visual range air combat. Because the gap between how most people imagine aerial engagements and how they actually occur in this technological environment is significant enough to define the entire outcome. The traditional image of air combat, 2 aircraft maneuvering for position, closing to visual range, firing at a target the pilot can see, describes a mode of warfare that the AIM-12OD was specifically designed to make obsolete. When an AMRAAM leaves the rail, the launching aircraft transmits mid-course guidance updates via data link, steering the missile toward its projected intercept point. At a programmed range from the target, the missile's own active radar seeker activates and the weapon becomes fully autonomous. No further input required from the pilot who fired it. The launching aircraft can break off, defend against incoming weapons, or engage a second target simultaneously. The missile finishes the problem on its own. This matters because it removes the constraint that made air-to-air combat historically dependent on closure geometry and visual identification. The Venezuelan Su-30 pilots were flying toward an engagement expecting that their speed and numbers would allow at least some of them to reach KH-31A launch range before the American fighters could respond effectively. They were modeling the problem as one of closure and attrition. The actual problem from the American side was one of fire control solution confirmation and weapons assignment. A problem that had been solved 11 minutes before any Venezuelan pilot knew the Super Hornets had launched. At 1:21 p.m., the Venezuelan formation reached 78 nautical miles from the Truman. The Su-30's N001VE radars began achieving fire control lock on the carrier. Launch preparation sequences initiated. Hostile intent became unambiguous on every sensor track in the strike group's picture. Commander Patricia Walsh, leading the 1st Super Hornet Division at call sign Raptor 01, had her weapons authorization before the Venezuelan pilots completed their pre-launch checks. All Raptor flights, weapons free. Fox 3, engage. 96. AIM-120Ds left 16 aircraft in a ripple sequence lasting 11 seconds. The launches were visible from satellite. 96 white contrails climbing against Caribbean blue, accelerating through Mach 1 in 4 seconds, through Mach 3 in 16 seconds, guidance units receiving data link updates from the E-2D's composite track picture, each missile assigned a specific target with a kill probability calculation the fire control computer had already run to its conclusion. Inside the Venezuelan formation, the SP-015 radar warning receivers triggered simultaneously, 10 cockpits filled with threat audio. Missile launch detected, multiple inbound. The Su-30 pilots broke into their defensive doctrine. Chaff dispensed in continuous bursts, hard turns to deny aspect angle, engines pushed to maximum afterburner, trying to reach a geometry where chaff clouds could interrupt seeker acquisition. The AIM-12OD's active radar seeker doesn't experience the engagement the way a human pilot does. It receives a return, it calculates intercept geometry, it makes corrections. The chaff clouds that filled the airspace around the Venezuelan formation were a problem the seeker's signal processing was designed to solve, distinguishing the Doppler return of a moving aircraft from the slowly dispersing metallic cloud of radar reflectors. The first impact happened at 1:24 p.m., 74 nautical miles from the Truman. One Su-30 ceased to return a radar track, then a second, then 4 more in the next 31 seconds as the missile wave reached the formation's interior. The 2 remaining Su-30s had survived the initial volley through a combination of maneuvering and the statistical reality that 96 missiles assigned to 10 targets produces redundant engagement opportunities that not all of them need to succeed on the first pass. The second pass wasn't necessary. Follow-on missiles from the trailing Super Hornet divisions reached their intercept points before the surviving Su-30S could reach Catch-31A launch range. All 7 flankers destroyed. Total elapsed time from first launch to last Su-30 impact, 4 minutes and 8 seconds. The 3 F-16S had been watching this happen on their radar warning receivers from the moment the first AIM-12OD seekers went active. They broke south at maximum afterburner, emergency power, pointed at Venezuelan territorial airspace 55 nautical miles behind them. The closure rate between a Mach 0.9 F-16 running for home and a Mach 4 AIM-120D tracking from behind is not a geometry that benefits the aircraft. 2 F-16S were destroyed before they covered 20 miles. The third received a missile detonation close enough to sever its hydraulic systems and fuel lines without destroying the aircraft outright. The pilot declared emergency and ejected at 12,000 feet. All 10 Venezuelan pilots were recovered from the Caribbean. The search and rescue operation, conducted by 2 MH-60R Seahawks from the USS Gonzales, took 1 hour and 42 minutes to collect all survivors across the debris field. None were critically injured. All were transferred to Venezuelan Coast Guard vessels by late afternoon. The Truman had not altered course. It had not increased speed. Its air wing resumed normal flight operations 40 minutes after the last hostile track dropped from the radar picture. The engagement was logged, the weapons expenditure was recorded, and Captain Okafor issued a brief all-hands acknowledging the crew's performance before the ship returned to its operational routine. The cost accounting that follows requires no editorial commentary to make its point. Venezuela committed 7 Su-30 Mk2 flankers at approximately $55 million each in current operational replacement value. Finding replacement airframes under existing arms embargo conditions is not straightforward. And 3 F-16A Fighting Falcons at roughly $22 million each in refurbished operational value. Total aircraft value, $451 million. Add training investment across 10 career pilots at approximately $2 million each, and the total committed asset value for this operation approached $471 million. None of the Cat-31A missiles were fired. Every weapon Venezuela sent toward the Truman remained in its launcher until the aircraft carrying it was destroyed. Not a single Venezuelan weapon reached launch parameters. The United States expended 96 AIM-120D missiles at $1.79 million each in FY 2024 procurement cost, plus fuel and helicopter SAR operations. Total expenditure approximately $174 million in munitions. 0 aircraft lost, 0 personnel casualties. The Truman's flight operations log shows a 40-minute interruption. At face value, the cost ratio of roughly 2.7 to 1 in Venezuela's favor on raw dollar spending looks closer than the strategic outcome would suggest. What the dollar ratio misses is that Venezuela lost 30% of its operational fighter inventory in 4 minutes. The United States expended munitions from a production line that will replace them within the current procurement cycle. Venezuela's path to replacing 7 Su-30s under current sanctions and diplomatic conditions is measured in years, not months, and assumes a buyer willing to sell and a logistics chain willing to deliver, neither of which is guaranteed. The intelligence value harvested during the engagement adds another dimension the financial accounting doesn't capture. Every emission the Venezuelan aircraft produced, radar frequencies, data link protocols, electronic warfare responses, the specific chaff dispensing patterns the Su-30 pilots used in their defensive brakes, was captured by the E-2D's signals intelligence package and the strike group's passive electronic warfare receivers. The N001VE radar's emission profile, its frequency agility parameters, its scan rates under threat conditions. This is data that updates the electronic order of battle used to build jamming profiles for the next generation of American EW systems. Venezuela paid $471 million to update an American database entry. The broader audience watching this engagement drew predictable conclusions. Beijing's People's Liberation Army Air Force had been wargaming scenarios involving massed fighter strikes against American carrier strike groups using their own J-16 and J-20 aircraft, carrying YJ-12 anti-ship missiles with performance characteristics broadly similar to the KH-31A. The Venezuelan engagement provided a real-world validation of AIM-120D employment timelines, of E-2D radar coverage geometry at operational ranges, and of how quickly a carrier can cycle 16 aircraft from ready status to weapons release. Chinese analysts are sophisticated enough to understand that their aircraft are more capable than Venezuelan Su-30s, and their pilots are better trained than the pilots who flew this mission. They are also sophisticated enough to understand that the structural disadvantage the Venezuelan formation faced, being tracked from 148 nautical miles while believing their approach was undetected, isn't a function of aircraft capability. It's a function of the E-2D and Link 16 and the integrated kill chain that surrounds every American carrier group everywhere it operates. Addressing that disadvantage requires solving a different class of problem than buying better fighters. Russia's aerospace defense analysts noted something specific about the engagement sequence. The 16 aircraft response was airborne before the Venezuelan formation reached 130 nautical miles. The time between the E-2D's first contact report and the first EMAL's catapult firing was under 2 minutes. For any military planner building a scenario that depends on catching a carrier air wing on deck, that timeline closes the window considerably. The lesson that every regional air force operating within range of American carrier aviation has to incorporate is not complicated, but it is uncomfortable. The asymmetry isn't primarily about aircraft performance, and Su-30 Mk2 is a genuine fourth-generation fighter with real capability in the right operational context. The asymmetry is about information. The Venezuelan pilots flew an entire approach believing they were working towards surprise, while the Truman Strike Group had been building engagement solutions against them for 47 minutes. They weren't countered by better pilots or more agile aircraft. They were countered by a system that knew they were coming before they left their runway and had completed its targeting before they completed their climb. This is what operating inside a battle network means in practice. Not that any individual platform is invincible, that no individual platform operates in isolation, and that attacking one node in the network means triggering a response from all of them simultaneously. The 10 Venezuelan pilots who ejected over the Caribbean that afternoon were professionals following orders they believed had a reasonable chance of producing the political outcome their command intended. The intelligence briefings they were given were wrong about American sensor coverage. The tactical calculations they were given were wrong about engagement timeline. The assumption that Caracas was operating on that 10 aircraft could threaten a carrier before the defensive architecture surrounding that carrier could respond was wrong in a way that the wreckage field scattered across 20 nautical miles of international waters now documents in detail. The USS Harry S. Truman is somewhere in the Caribbean right now, on a deployment schedule that wasn't disrupted by this engagement. The E-2D that detected the Venezuelan formation at 148 nautical miles is airborne above it right now, painting a picture of everything within 350 miles. The Super Hornets that fired 96 missiles this afternoon were back aboard the ship by early evening, aircraft inspected, ordnance restocked, ready for the next alert cycle. Somewhere in Caracas, the meeting that follows a $471 million operational failure is happening. The questions being asked in that meeting about sensor coverage and engagement timelines and why nobody in the intelligence chain told the pilots they were being tracked from the moment they went active, those questions don't have good answers. The data the Americans collected will be used to defeat Venezuelan electronic systems for the next decade. The aircraft are gone. The pilots are alive, returned by the Americans who defeated them, which is its own kind of message about the proportionality of the response. You do not attack aircraft carriers, not because it's technically impossible, because the network surrounding them sees the attempt forming before the aircraft are fueled, and the response is already computed before the first pilot starts his engines. If this breakdown changed how you think about carrier strike group defense, share it and subscribe. The engagements that define what naval air power actually means are worth understanding before the next one starts.